Tariff Society Part 3. Fallacies of protection draw their real strength from one great fact that there is a perception that the opportunity of work is a privilege and that being employed is much more important than wealth creation. Protection, as we have seen, operates to reduce the power of a community in wealth. Yet what does this prove when there is a great anxiety for men to secure and sustain employment? What about the securing employment with wages with real purchasing power? Those who imagine that they can overcome the popular leaning to protection by pointing out that protective tariffs make necessary more work to obtain the same result, ignoring the fact that in all civilized countries that they have reached a certain stage of development, the majority of the people are unable to employ themselves, and unless they find someone to give them work, are helpless and hence are accustomed to regard work as a thing to be desired in itself, and anything which makes more work as a benefit, not an injury. Taken from Henry George Protection of Free Trade. There never lived any man, who wanted work for the sake of work itself. Men work to obtain produce to satisfy their desires and needs. But in society today, there are such large numbers of men who expect to get work, not to, to produce or any proportional share of the produce of their work, but a fixed sum, which is much less. This small fixed amount takes the place of the natural inducement to work. This fixed sum as the object of work takes away from the argument of the justice of the situation. As Henry George said, now the very fact that without compulsion no one will work unless he can get something for it causes, in common thought, the idea of wages to become involved in the idea of work, and leads men to think and speak of wanting work when what they really want are the wages that are to be got by work, not upon its productiveness. Dissociates the idea of return to the laborer from the idea of actual productiveness of his labor, throwing the latter idea into the background or eliminating it altogether. Some men only possess the power of labor. Labor is the producer of wealth. It is the active factor in production, but it is useless without the no less necessary passive factor, land or natural resources. Without this passive factor to work on, the power to labor must either lure the material necessary to work on or sell their labor to those who have such material. The majority of men must find someone who will set them up to pay them wages, he keeping for himself the majority of the produce. Commodities not sold today could be sold tomorrow. Not so with the power of labor. Those who have nothing but their labor to sell do not have the same power as the commodity owners. There are more sellers of labor than buyers of labor. Only a comparatively few buyers have the means of employing labor, and even in the best of times, some men find it difficult to sell their labor and are exposed to privation and anxiety, if not physical suffering. A man who then employs another is seen as a benefactor to him. This feeling runs throughout the labor force and influences our thinking. One cannot read our newspaper without seeing that the notice of a project of any kind usually concludes by stating that it will give employment to so many men, as though the giving of employment and the provision of work were one of the benefits of the project. And this is something that we should all be grateful for. This habit of seeing employment as a benefaction gives currency to the view that work is desirable of itself and not productiveness of it, and the community should strive to get the most of it, since benefit of the working classes. This view diverts men away from grasping the truth that protection only operates to reduce the productiveness of labor, but also wholesomely diverts men from having much thought on the matter. It is always labor, not the productiveness of labor, that is looked upon as a thing to be desired. We stop here now for a short break. It is the general opinion that labor saving invention is to everyone's benefit. On the other hand, there is the common belief among working men that labor saving machinery is injurious to them. Although this belief we examine the whole question of labor saving invention upon the working class, we will reach the similar results that we have with the tariff question, that to restrain labor saving invention is as equally absurd as restraining of trade. While labor saving inventions do enormously increase the production of wealth, in it itself does not it in itself does not bring about a commensurate inequality in distribution. This is done by the inherent arrangements in place, accepted by society. While earnings to labor does increase with labor saving devices, the proportion of the product would not necessarily increase. The tendency of these improvements would benefit all, including the working class, despite the temporary dislocations that will occur with resulting redundancies. However, as a proportion of the product, which has enormously increased as a result of this, there will be a decrease. Any increase in the labor share would only come about by trade union action or maybe legal interference. It is by trade union action or legislation that an improved working conditions or reduced hours, and not the increased power given by labor saving devices. The problem that must be addressed is why has free trade or labor saving invention or any similar circumstance not resulted or not produced the general benefits to labor expected. The problem is then one of distribution of wealth. When increased production of wealth does not proportionately benefit the working class, it must be that it is accompanied by increased inequality of distribution. To make the point more succinctly, perhaps it may be best to refer to what Henry George said concerning Robinson Crusoe. The discovery of the island, which we have heretofore supposed, involving calls by other ships, would greatly increase the wealth which the labor of its population of two could obtain. But it would not follow that in the increased wealth both would gain. Friday was Crusoe's slave, and no matter how much the opening of trade the rest of the world might increase wealth. He could only demand the wages of a slave, enough to maintain him in working ability. So long as Crusoe himself lived, he would doubtless take good care of the companion of his solitude. But when in the course of time the island had come into the circle of civilized life and had passed into the possession of some heir of Crusoe's or some purchaser living probably in England and was cultivated with a view to making it yield the largest income, the gulf between the proprietor who owned it and the slave who worked upon it could not merely have enormously widened as compared with the time when Crusoe and Friday shared with substantial equality the joint produce of their labor, but the share of the slave might have become absolutely less, and his condition lower and harder. Times of which the statistician takes no account, they would be worse off than Friday, compelled to a round of dreary toil, unlightened by variety, undignified by responsibility, unstimulated by seeing results and partaking of them. Their life, as compared with that of Friday, would be less than that of men, and more that of machines. And the effect of such changes would be the same upon laborers, such as we call free, free, that is to say, to use their own power to labor, but not free to that which is necessary to its use. If Friday, instead of setting Crusoe's foot upon his head, in token that he would thence forward his slave, what would have been the difference? As he could only live upon Crusoe's property on Crusoe's terms, his freedom would simply have amounted to the freedom to emigrate, to drown himself in the sea, or to give himself up to the cannibals. Men enjoying such freedom, that is to say, the freedom to starve or emigrate, as the alternative of getting someone else's permission to labor, cannot be enriched by improvements that increase the production of wealth. They have no more power to claim any share of it than has the slave. Those who want them to work must give them what the master must give the slave if he wants to work, enough to support life and strength. But when they can find no one who wants them to work, they must starve, and if they cannot beg, grant to Crusoe ownership of the island, and Friday, the free man, would be as much subject to his will as Friday, the slave, as incapable of claiming any share of an increased production of wealth, no matter how great it might be, nor from what cause it might come. And what would be true in the case of one man would be true of any member. Suppose 10,000 Fridays, all free men, all absolute owners of themselves, but one Crusoe, the absolute owner of the island. So long as his ownership and so long as his ownership and could be enforced, would not be the one be 10,000 as fully as though he were the legal owner of their flesh and blood. Since no one could use his island without his consent, it would follow that no one could labor or even live without his permission. The order, leave my property, would be a sentence of death. This owner of the island would be to the other 10,000 freemen who lived upon it their landlord or land god, of whom they would stand in more real awe than any deity that their religion taught them reigned above. For a Scottish landlord told his tenant, God Almighty may have made the land, but I own it. And if you don't do as I say, off you go. No increase of wealth can enable such free laborers to claim more than a bare living, taken from protection or free trade. All the advances in society, increased foreign trade, living saving, labor-saving devices, discovery of new natural resources, new skills, all these redound in greater proportion to the landowner rather than the worker. In civilized societies, a large working class has the power to labor, but are denied access to those natural resources, high rents, or taking wages that are a fraction of their yield. With increased wealth, the worker, his condition, becomes absolutely as well as relatively worse. But one must be sure to not blame societal advance for this, but only the conditions under which labor is allowed to combine with land or natural resources. If conditions are equitable, they bring good for all. If they are inequitable, opposite. In the current situation, where some men have absolute ownership of the natural universe, of the material universe, while other men cannot access it without paying tribute, the blessing of material advances can be a curse on the working man. The effect is to destroy independence and to undervalue skill and artisanship and to concentrate business and make it harder for the worker to become an entrepreneur. Next week, we will continue our discussion on trade. Before we end, I would like again to let you attendees know that Unsustainable Development is an educational offering devoted to the dissemination of its cause to all of mankind and to those who have the English language as their official language in the first instance and to all eventually all over the world. To make this possible, because we do not charge a fee for its dissemination, we rely wholeheartedly on monetary donations to meet the cost of achieving these goals. If you have found these sessions useful thus far and would like others to have access to them, we would gratefully accept your donations should you be inclined to offer them. You can send donations to our PayPal account at the email address notebroker2001@yahoo.com. Thank you for your kind gesture. As indicated before, you can communicate with us by going to our Facebook page on Sustainable Development or our YouTube channel, Balancing the Economy. We will respond to all your comments or questions. You can also subscribe to our YouTube channel, press the alert button to get notices that our latest session has been posted. All sessions are archived at our Facebook page. Please share with your family, friends, and acquaintances.